psychic abilities. Listen, there was a time in my life before you go anywhere that I would have thought that that stuff was crazy and out of this world and evil. And I'm going to tell you guys something right now. I wouldn't be where I'm at today without the beautiful gift and the help of wonderful people like today's guests who can tap in and hear and receive messages from the other side. I think this is going to be an incredible conversation. Today we have Paul Selig with us. How are you, Paul?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you're here. I actually had just asked you a question and you told me that you were once a college professor. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Take me back way back then before your gift came online, basically.
Well, my gifts kicked in before I was teaching college. I was a year out of graduate school and I had hit a real wall in my life. And I'd been raised an atheist, but I found myself starting to pray because I didn't know what else to do. And I heard a voice telling me to get my act together and how to do it, and I listened to it, and then everything began to change. And that was the beginning of a spiritual opening, and my psychic abilities seem to have come with that. So they're very intertwined in my experience. When I was maybe 30 or so, I studied a form of energy healing. And I found that when my hands were on people, I began to hear things for them. So if I had my hand in your chest and I heard the name Bobby, I learned to say, who's Bobby? And you might say my father, my brother, my dog. And as that kept getting confirmed, I began to trust the radio station that I was playing. But I began teaching college at around 27, and I did this psychic and spiritual work for many, many years very quietly. I wasn't looking to get a career doing it. It's what I did. I had a group that met in my apartment for 18 years. And I, taught at NYU, and I ran a graduate program at a small college in New England for all that time.
You know, it's so interesting how it sounds so similar to a lot of people's transition into their spiritual path. Mm-hmm. Would you say that it all happened just kind of out of the blue for you?
Yes and no. When I look back at my life, there were experiences when I was a child, a few of them that were distinct and important to me, but I wouldn't have thought of myself as psychic, and I still don't run around saying, hi, I'm a psychic. That's, yeah. I say that I'm a channeler. I channel. It's something that I do. It's a skill set. And the psychic stuff seemed to have sort of come in to augment that. But it was a process for me, and it still is. Some people think that you get hit on the head with a bolt of lightning, and I had one of those experiences at 25. I had what people said later sounded like a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, an experience of energy moving through my body and out through the top of my head. And after that happened, I began seeing little lights around people, and I didn't have a context for that. I didn't know what was going on. Like maybe I have a detached retina, maybe I'm going crazy. And then I was led to people who were able to support me in what I was beginning to experience. So that's how that happened.
I'd love to go into that experience for you.
Sure.
What was that like?
Well, I was I think 25. It was 1987, and there was this event that people were calling the harmonic convergence. I heard people were going to be waking up. And I had had a few months, I was basically newly sober. And I had a few months of thinking maybe there is something like God or something like God, because I'd heard a voice telling me to act on it, and I did. And I stopped drinking, which was shocking to me and everybody else that I knew. So I heard this event was happening, and I went up to the roof of the building that I was living in Manhattan at the time. And I thought, if there is a God or something like a God and you ask to be woken up to it, why would it want to say no? I didn't come with a lot of baggage. I hadn't been raised with any religion. And I was trying to teach myself to meditate. And somebody had given me a crystal and somebody gave me a mantra, and I thought you needed the props to wake up. Mm-hmm. But I was saying this mantra, and I began to feel this energy sort of build sort of at the base of my being and start to push its way up and out through the top of my head. And it kind of left me frozen on the roof and sort of swaying in the energy. And it wasn't frightening. I just knew something was happening that I couldn't deny. And now I go years later, well, Maybe you were hyperventilating. Maybe it was some form of breath work. I didn't know what it was. I didn't have any context. All I knew was that somebody like me who'd come from none of this stuff and wasn't looking for it prior, I think I needed something that was tangible that I could experience. I'm not a good New Ager, somebody, waving a crystal over my head saying you're healed. That wasn't going to do it for me. I'm basically a New York skeptic. And I had this experience, and it was life-changing primarily in that it anchored a memory of something more that I couldn't refute.
I know exactly what you mean.
And that's what did it. So that was the beginning. And then the lights led me to study healing to get a context for that. And then I was volunteering at a center in Manhattan for people that were, at that time, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic. So people were dying, and these sort of pop-up clinics were showing up. And I was volunteering because I'd been asked to go work. And that's when I found out that I could hear for other people. And I found out that I was clairsentient. I was able to feel what was going on in other people's systems. I'm not a medical intuitive, but because the initial population that I was working with was dealing with physical challenge, I became pretty adept at that time at feeling where things were. And those abilities stayed with me, but they were altered and have, sort of transformed as I've grown into the work that I now do.
I love that. It's so interesting that, you told me that you live in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you used to live in New York, of all places.
Mm-hmm.
I got to ask, because I really do believe that like where you live makes a big difference on your energy.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, do you believe that to be true? And then number two, what is life like differently for you, your energy, maybe even your ability, perhaps, living, New York compared to Maui?
I developed in New York City, and that I think any place is holy, and every place is holy unless you decide that it's not.
Beautiful.
So New York is a dense energy, and I think it was probably maybe took more work. But I've been showing up for this stuff even when I didn't want to for 30 years now. I didn't plan to end up on Maui. I was channeling a workshop in Costa Rica in 2020, and New York City shut down for COVID. It went on lockdown while I was away, and I knew I couldn't go back there at that time. There was nothing to go back to at that moment. Things were shutting down. And a friend invited me to Maui, found me a little tiny house to stay in. And the moment I was there, I began to relax in a way that I don't know that I ever had. And I basically didn't go home. It took me 2 years. I never went back. My dog got sent out to me. I bought a house. I have a life there, and I have community there. And I'm very grateful for it, but it's not something that I think I would have chosen because I wouldn't have known that I could. And it was a rerouting for me to what I think I really needed. And my job was to say yes to it and not to go back to what I had known, which was comfortable in its way. I had already stopped teaching college by then. Because I had taught at NYU for many years, I stayed in New York. And I didn't need to, and I knew that much. So have my abilities changed? I think they have become more refined, but I don't know that it's because of the location. I think it's because there's more expansiveness in my life now. In some ways, it's a simpler life that I lead. They've dictated, I think, 4 books since I've been on Maui, and that's only since 2020, so it's almost like a book a year, I think, that they've done. And the books are dictated. I don't write anything. I sit in a chair, I listen, I repeat what I hear, and the transcriptions of those recordings are the books, from page 1 to the end, chapter titles and everything else. And I think it's allowed me to do that, but and I think it was necessary for my personal growth. I think at a soul level, it was necessary. Could I be doing this work in New York? Yeah, I could, and I did. And I think that some of the places that people call meccas are as dense in the confusion that accompanies spiritual seeking. There's a lot of stuff all over the place. So I don't know that it matters. I think occasionally people say, I have to be someplace where I can be spiritual. And well, you have to be someplace else so you can be spiritual. You need to look at that.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's wherever you are.
I love that. I love that. So I have a background in religion. I was a Christian for a long period of time. And so for me, I always like to address, when you're in religion, you are taught that anything outside of that religion is like wrong, For people who are out there who might be listening to this, who maybe this is their first time ever hearing, and by the way, I honor the fact that you trust me enough to have this conversation with you. And later on, I would love for you to channel and tell us what you hear and what the message is. But for people out there who might be skeptic, just like you once were, what exactly is, in like layman's terms, what you do and or what you receive, what it sounds like, what it feels like, and do you believe that it's a gift that anybody can access?
I believe it's a skill set and a gift, I suppose you could say that, but I think it's something that we probably all have some innate capacity for, but needs to be developed. And I think that is choice and that is willingness, and that's whoever is going to be working with you at a higher level to facilitate, and finally, the reason for doing it.
Sure.
My abilities always have come in service to other people. I wasn't expecting to get a career doing it. It happened, I think, because I was consistently showing up for the work, and it became something that was surrendered to God as I understand God. This is what happened, and I'll show up because it's what I've been given to do. I consider myself in any authentic channel as a radio. And my guides say we're all radios and that we're always in broadcast, and our broadcast is our consciousness at whatever level that is. They say high, low, and in between, and people are operating at all of those levels. It's not always at the same time, but we all have the capacity to be up and down and angry and full of love and all of those things. So as a radio, what I do as a channel is I am tuning into a broadcast. And in my case, it's a very specific broadcast from a collective of guides that are teachers. And what they're teaching, interestingly enough, seems almost to have a basis in what you would think of as Christian mysticism, but it goes before that. And they've been very clear, this is an older teaching. But they speak about the Christ as a principle. And the Christ, they say, is the aspect of the Creator that can be realized in form. And the purpose of the divine self is to reclaim everything that it encounters, which is the light within you claiming the parts of oneself and that have been held in shadow, and then being in a broadcast to illumine or to bring to light that which has been held in darkness. It's not a religious teaching. The guides are pretty clear on that. There have been religious scholars that have debated this a little bit, who know the work that comes through me. The head of the religious studies department at Rice, and maybe he's a dean now, Jeffrey Kripal, said that this was a Gnostic teaching. My guides were teaching a form of Gnosticism, which sort of predates and coincides with the beginning of Christianity. And Victoria Nelson, who was a scholar who was actually on the listening end of the first several books that were dictated, because there has to be an active listener, felt that it was hermetic because the guides are teaching the divinity of the body and the holiness of all things in manifestation. I honestly don't care. I don't know. I don't think of it that way. I think everybody has capacity. If I were 6'5", I might be playing basketball, but I'm not. I was developed in different ways, and all of the ways that I was developed seem to contribute to what I do today. And I wouldn't have known that. And that includes sitting in front of a classroom and having to hold a space for a bunch of people and knowing when to keep my mouth shut. And it also had to do with learning to step out of the way and allowing some kind of transmission to come through, which I actually was doing unknowingly when I was trying to write when I was much younger myself. And I think it also came as the result, in my case at least, of an almost enforced humility, because I didn't get into this stuff because I was getting everything that I wanted. And it looked like I was from the outside. At the time I started to wake up and got sober, I was 25. I had a master's from Yale. I was a writer getting produced in New York and London. I looked like everything was going to happen. And basically the ceiling came down on my head, or I pulled it down on my head, or whatever happened. And what that was not only a rude awakening, it meant that my life in some ways had to be rebuilt, and rebuilt in a different kind of foundation. And I, as a gay guy, was somebody who was not welcomed by most organized religion. It wasn't available to me in a fundamentalist way. But I think that the yearning for spirituality was there and had always been there, but it didn't have a name. And it didn't have a name for me because I grew up in a home where my parents, for good reasons, both didn't believe in God. My father had been a Holocaust survivor and was sent to England when he was 12, and his immediate family escaped. And my mother had been molested by her minister. And so between the two of them, we didn't talk about
There's
this
no
stuff.
way, yeah.
It wasn't going to happen.
Not going to happen. Yeah.
And so in some ways, I had to come to these kinds of things on my own. Mm-hmm. And I guess I did. And I think whatever first called me to it didn't stop, which is the good news. Once that signal was there, that broadcast was there, it's actually stayed. And for that, I'm grateful.
Beautiful. Beautiful. There was a lot there. Mm-hmm. There was a lot there.
It's impossible for you to have a successful relationship with another human being or a partner if you don't have a successful relationship with yourself. And what we as human beings don't realize is that we are deeply disconnected. We're disconnected from Mother Earth. We're disconnected from peace. We're disconnected from love. What we do at Awaken is we curate different exercises to help you reconnect first to yourself, and then the beautiful process of reconnecting to everybody begins. And that's why Awaken is so powerful. You'll do more in 3 days at Awaken than you would do 30 years anywhere else.
I was so stuck, and now I feel peace.
Awakening has been the best thing we have done for our marriage.
Coming here, I realized that the answers were inside of me all the time.
Head on over to DannyMorel.com/awaken now to get your tickets today.
Tell me something. I didn't think this question was going to come up, but I can't help but notice the correlation. And I don't think I've ever shared what I'm about to share, but I feel like I need to share it. Mm-hmm. When I was going through my awakening process, I remember I had moments where I thought I was gay. Mm-hmm. And it was like I would get spiritual messages, and I started to tune into like the frequency of it. Like I would hear it and feel it, and I don't know what was happening, but I feel like I was feeling that energy, within me, or something was happening. And then the more and more that I went into it, the more and more that I was realizing that what was happening was like, I had a fear about it, because we are conditioned as men to be afraid of like that part of us. Mm-hmm. And it was really beautiful, because what I realized was happening was that I was going into a conditioning, a societal conditioning that was created that had some sort of fear in me, right? And I dealt with it, and I'm not that there's anything wrong, but I'm not. But my question is, my psychic is also gay. Uh-huh. And I can't help but wonder if there's a correlation, because could it be that there's a level of societal conditioning and fear that blocks you from accessing that channel? Have you ever thought about that? That unless you can move past it, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's something that my guides teach when they teach. My guides work through energetic attunements, and one of the attunements they work with is about becoming free of what they call the fake ceiling that we operate with that says we're not allowed, and this idea that we're tethered to our past choices or the cultural norms and all of these things that in some ways keep us kind of stuck in a world.
That's right.
So I've noticed that there's a whole lot of gay psychics there, and I think that there are reasons for it. I don't know much about, what is in, I guess it's in Native American culture, two spirits and all of that stuff, and people that were operating in two different realities, and they were often gay, I guess. It's not my thing. I don't know. Don't quote me on this.
Sure.
I also think, though, and this is just out of experience, and maybe this will change, that when you grow up with that, and you have to become entirely self-aware of who you are and how you don't operate within the culture, you actually develop a level of sensitivity which is probably born around safety or the desire to be safe, which you don't have to if you fit in, And does that correlate to psychic ability? It does mean, I think, that you develop a kind of antenna for certain things. And I think some of it's just about sensitivity. The psychic that I go to, and I have somebody that I've seen for many, many years who I trust is as straight as they come. He's like a guy you'd see in the Irish bar. He's about as regular as you get. Yeah. And he's just terrific for me.
Wow.
Okay. So people are very different. There really aren't hard and fast rules. There's a tendency, I think, in some circles in culture to sort of glamorize psychic stuff or think of it as special. And I actually don't think that it is. I think that some people have more refined ability. And I have a dear friend, Laura Day, who's a very good psychic and a very well-known one, who says that, psychic ability in her estimation comes from trauma, that there's something very traumatic early on that creates, and I'm not going to say this right either, but kind of an opening to other things. And that could well be true in my case, and maybe the case of many others. I have another good friend who's a good psychic, Natalie Sudman, who's got a very good book about her past life experience. She was blown up in a roadside bomb in Iraq. She was on government assignment in Iraq as an archaeologist, and she came back, with a whole lot of information. That's another trauma.
Wow.
So I think when we're not locked into a basis of what we think is supposed to be there, suddenly everything else becomes available and possible.
I get you. Do you think, I oftentimes find myself thinking back for, let alone 100 years, but imagine, 2, 3, 4, 500 years ago, before there was any of this, before there was this, before there was this, before there was, do you feel that back then we as human beings were more attuned to our giftings?
I've heard that. I've read that. I think we were also more superstitious, and I think we were also burning witches, and I think that there was a lot of other stuff that was going on. There's a writer that I like, who was writing in, I think, the 1920s, Emmett Fox, who talked about this, and he said, you hear these stories of miracles, and the reality is that the energy was less dense and thought was more creative. And my guides actually, now that I think of it, are teaching something similar about how manifestation occurs. Their idea of manifestation is that it occurs in what they call the upper room, or the octave of vibration above what they call the common field, which is reality as we know it. And it's the same principle. When there's less density, things occur much more rapidly, and thought is more creative. The problem we have here is that because we've been taught to want certain things or get certain things within basically a reality that's kind of born in appearance and greed and all that stuff, we're all trying to get the stuff we think we should have. And when you go up to the higher, it's very, very different. And then you start to move into the idea of becoming receptive to good or to source at whatever level that is.
Yeah, I love that. So much of what you're saying is resonating, because I remember going through it. I'd love for you to channel.
You know, the guides once said, somebody once asked me to do that at a book signing, and I said, and the guides came through and said, "We are not the entertainment."
Okay,
and that was the end of it. I mean, if they have something to say, I can tune in.
Then that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's only one thing. We would only say one thing: the idea of who you are, the idea of who you are, the fabric of your manifestation is far more malleable. Than you know it is. Than you know it is. And the identity you hold is actually structured on a basis of past experience. Your idea of being a man, or your gender, whatever it is, and what that means. And what that means is born in a collective agreement to what things should be, to what things should be. When you move beyond what things should be, you may begin to allow what truly is. You may begin to allow what truly is. In fact, there is one note sung. In the entire universe. You may call it God or source. The infinite I am that embodies in individual ways, or the God within you expressed as the whole, or the God within you expressed as a whole. When you realize you are not imprisoned, by the creations of the small self, the edicts of personality, you begin to have a very different experience of how things are made, how you attract what you attract, how you attract what you attract, and how you can lift a world, to the light, through presence and being. That is our instruction. How a world is made new. By the God within you, that knows itself in all manifestation, period. And they're saying period. So I didn't tell you that I whisper and repeat, but now you know that's how it comes through.
Yeah. That was beautiful. Do you remember what you just said?
I know the gist of it, but no. I retain maybe 30% of everything that they say. I'm really taking dictation. So if you think of somebody reading ticker tape or fortune cookies one after the other, I'm just trying to get the next phrase. That's my focus. And then I don't always know that everything has made sense until I see it transcribed. That's the truth with the books. The books are delivered just like this. But if you can imagine, a 350-page book being spoken like this, that doesn't need any editing, that's how this happens.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. What you said was so powerful that I hope everyone can maybe just go back and listen to it.
Yeah.
Because what he was saying is that you do not need to be essentially like caged or trapped by your small self and the creation of the small self, because the small self is essentially a creation of the 3D world, the world that we live in. And once you understand that, then you can go past that and you can really tap into a freedom that will help. I think you used the word elevate.
I could have.
You said, and I raised my hands. Yeah. Elevate us all, not just yourself, but everybody.
Oh, it's for everybody.
Yeah, it's for everybody.
This isn't selfish stuff when you get to it. There's been an apt criticism of what we used to call the New Age, which was that it was kind of self-centered. And why did I create this? And why did I manifest this? And what the guides say is we don't realize that we're actually in energetic accord or agreement with everything that we see and experience, which means we're in alignment to it. And manifestation really is alignment. So when you move to the higher level of tone or vibrational accord, and they say ACCORD or ACHORD is on a piano, like a chord of music, you begin to call to you those experiences and that realization. And they actually say that transforms the physical plane, because the physical plane always, they say, has been a product of consciousness, a collective agreement to what reality is.
I love that. Paul, three words that I want to ask you about, and just for you to share just from your own life's experience, but money, health, and relationships. It's three, my mentor said the three energies, right? That we can, based off of where we're vibrating, we can live at different levels in each of these areas, whether it comes to money, whether it comes to health. And what I love to do, I love to show people how, you know, their thoughts, feelings, and emotions, when you just change them, then you can change the outcome of these three areas. I'd love for you to speak to me and speak to us on that.
Well, it sounds like you have your teaching on this. I mean, I don't know what they'll say about it. Money's great. They're saying money is a creation. It's an idea made. It's an idea made in form. It is utilized in some ways in high ways. It is utilized some ways in high ways, some ways at the most base levels, some ways at the most base levels. You need to understand. You need to understand what money is. What money is simply an idea for exchange. Simply an idea for exchange. When you realize that money is an idea, when you realize that money is an idea, you can change your mind. You can change your mind. Have a higher idea. Have a higher idea. Here is the real challenge. Here is the real challenge when you speak of money. When you speak of money, you speak of something that will always be there. You speak of it as something that will always be there. It will not always be there. It will not always be there. It's simply an idea. It's simply an idea. There have been cultures and worlds. There have been cultures and worlds that have had no need for monetary systems, that have had no need for monetary systems. It's a way of entrenching yourself. It's a way of entrenching yourself in what has been, and seeking to get more of the same, and seeking to get more of the same. Your health is an outpicturing of consciousness. Your health is an outpicturing of consciousness, but the common field, reality that you know contributes to this. If you all breathe bad air, you all become sickly from it. You all become sickly from it. The physical body you hold has been claimed as separate from source, has been claimed as separate from source. The simple idea that God expresses through the body, that God expresses through the body, is in every cell of the body, is in every cell of the body, every cell of everything, in every cell of everything, would support vibrant health. That doesn't mean go to the doctor. That doesn't mean don't go to the doctor. You may need the doctor for many reasons. To have vibrant health. To have vibrant health, you must know the vibrancy of the body in accordance with source, in accordance with its source. Now, if you wish to talk about relationships, high, low, and in between, it's really very simple. You realize God dwells within you. When you realize that God dwells within you, it must dwell in all. It must dwell in all. When your relationships hold a basis of God within, they will not be distorted by fear. They will not be distorted by fear or wrong desire, the need to control another, the need to control another, the need to get one's way, and the need to get one's way. When you allow everybody to be holy, because in fact they already are, your experience of others changes. Your experience of others changes, and relationships are altered as well, period. And they're saying period.
I love that. Yeah. When you allow everybody to be holy, which they already are, our relationships change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When they're saying that, it's when you allow yourself to see everyone for who they are. Mm-hmm. Again, not from the small self, not from the part of you that thinks that they're going to hurt you, but look past that. Look at how holy and how loving every human being is. You know, what allowed me to forgive and to heal my relationship with, like, you know, my father or people who have wronged me is that I stopped looking at who they were when they hurt me, and I started looking at who they were before they were hurt, that caused them to hurt me. And that allowed me to see them through the eyes of forgiveness.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
You know, the guys I work with, they say God sees God in all of its creations, you know, because nothing's outside of it. And so when you begin to align to that aspect, I think you come to what you're talking about. You asked about money, and the guides talked about money as a creation. And I was wondering just now, if you had asked about supply, you would have had a very different answer, because supply is really what they teach, and money is a symbol of the way we get our needs met. But you see, true abundance and prosperity consciousness, I think, comes when one realizes the source of all things. So people think that the source of the income is the job, or the source of the love is the relationship, and all of those things. And those are ways those things can express through. But the problem is we end up making gods of them. So what happens if I don't have my job or my spouse or all those things? I won't have these things anymore. And we end up grabbing for more because we're frightened of losing what we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When you mentioned the word supply, you know, what brought that word up?
Only because I asked what they were talking about, because they don't talk about money per se. And they don't talk about money as a principle. They talk about supply as a principle. The idea, and it's taken me a long time to get to this, and I don't know that I'm really here with this one, but I was so poor it was ridiculous when I was in my late 20s. I mean, like, $40 to my name, poor. And somehow made it through that well. But I don't know what I was going to say, because that was a digression. What was I saying right before that?
I don't know,
Yeah, I don't know either.
but this came to me to ask you.
Yeah.
I know Ram Dass, for example,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
you live in Maui, so you've been to this place. I know Ram Dass, for example, got to a place in his journey where he wanted nothing to do with money.
Well, Ram Dass, I mean, I never knew him. I moved to Maui shortly after he passed, but his community is my community. Those are my friends. And I'm very grateful for them. And I have great respect for him as a teacher, although I'm learning more about his work now that I'm there. I really wasn't versed in it before I got there. The kids who were helping me get around when I first got to Maui were Ram Dass's caregivers. They're the guys who got him in and out of his wheelchair and, took care of his body. But he was being supported. I remember what I was going to say, because it is about this.
Okay.
You see, the idea of being supported is really interesting. And I have finally come to this place where it's not about trying to get what I think I'm supposed to have or what I want or what I think I should have, and moving into a place of reception, which comes with the awareness that whatever source is might actually know what I actually need and doesn't need to be told.
Wow.
Or ordered about. That's a very different way of being in reception. And that's kind of what they've been teaching through me for a while.
That's really deep.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Because the guide said through me years ago, there's nothing wrong with a house on the hill. Somebody gets to live there. And the question then is, why do you want it? And if you want the house on the hill to be the envy of your neighbors, you're creating through fear.
Right.
And you can do that, but then you have the residual problems that come with that, because the guides say the action of fear is to claim more fear. Every choice we make in fear is going to get us more of the same. And I found that to be true.
That was so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what if you want the house on the hill just because you want to experience a beautiful
That's
house on the
fine.
hill?
I have, and the funny thing is, I actually live in a house on a hill now, which I never, which is lovely, and I'm grateful for it. And there's nothing wrong with having the experience of anything. And people that say this is a place to explore physical reality, and that's the purpose of it all. I mean, I think that that's fine. However, what I think needs to be understood is that if there is source or God or whatever you want to call it, God is all things. And so the idea that it's better to be this or that is our bias. So the guides have said something to me like the king and the beggar are both learning, lessons about abundance just in different ways. And here's the news: we all get to learn them all.
Yeah.
It's not all just about getting what we want or what we think we should have.
Yeah.
I learned a great deal through what I went through when I was younger. I don't want to have to live through it again. I may have to, and if I do, I will learn, But I don't know that it's all about getting what I think I should have, because every time I do get what I think, every time I say, I'll give you a bad example. When I was in my late 30s, I said, I want to manifest a great relationship. I said, like a great romance, like Wuthering Heights. I never read Wuthering Heights. It's a codependent train wreck.
That's what you got?
I got a codependent train wreck with somebody who looked like they were out of that novel. It was nuts. I mean, and it still happens. Be careful what you ask for.
Sure.
So I've learned to say, whatever. I'm open to whatever. And then I get surprised in the nicest ways. I say this sometimes because people say, well, you manifested this. Years and years ago, somebody got me playing a computer game. The only computer game I ever played, which was The Sims, where you build little houses and relationships with people. And there's this one house I used to build, which was made of French doors with gray floors. And, It's the house I live in now years later. It really is.
Wow.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, I wasn't trying to manifest it. And maybe a part of me knew where I was going to go. And maybe it was waiting for me. Maybe it was a coincidence. But I've learned to trust that maybe there's a higher logic than what Paul, who's very biased about what he thinks she should be and get, is trying to commandeer.
Yeah, I get that. 2 more questions for you, Paul. I think there's a lot of people, for some reason, I went through a divorce, and for some reason, there's a lot of people that I feel are going through broken hearts right now. They're going through a bad breakup, and they're having a tough time dealing with that. It becomes a lot. What comes through, whether from you or from them, as a message for those people?
People who are suffering at the end of a relationship, be grateful for what you had. Be grateful for what you had. Be more grateful for what will come. It will come more rapidly, and it will come more rapidly. You can grieve the loss if you wish. You can grieve the loss if you wish, but when there is an adjustment in life, but when there is an adjustment in a life, there are new lessons, but there are new lessons to be learned. Be grateful for lessons of the old. Be grateful for the lessons of the old. Embrace what comes next. Embrace what comes next. Don't replicate the past. Don't replicate the past. Rejoice in the new potential. Rejoice in the new potential that actually awaits you, when you say yes to it, when you say yes to it.
Yes. I literally, if you can just hear what he said, be grateful and embrace. And, if you really tune into the messages that they're giving through Paul right now, it's the answer. We just have such a hard time with it. We have such a hard time with allowing ourselves to be grateful. Be grateful for what was. Be grateful for what you learned. I tell people all the time, sometimes be grateful for the thing that, even if the thing that you learned is, I never want to experience that ever again. Be grateful for it, because it taught you something that could prepare you for what's to come, right? And you just said the exact same thing. My message to all of you is like again, go back and hear that message. And really ask yourself, can you allow yourself to step into the energy of gratefulness? And can you allow yourself to step into the energy of embracing what's new, even though it's not physically in front of you just yet? Embrace it as if it were, because when you do, that's when it shows up. That's when it comes faster than you expected. I love that. Finally, Paul, I've seen people with my own eyes heal their bodies of things that never in my life that I think I would ever, be a part of it. A lot of it came from, after, like a mushroom journey, after an ayahuasca journey. The way I see it is, energy that was trapped was moved. And then when the energy that is trapped is moved, then the body heals. I've seen a lot of people who, I'm not saying to go do this, but after an experience at our event Awaken, they move this energy. They no longer need, prescription medication or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of people out there struggling in their health. From you or from them, what would be the message in regards to how they can heal their body?
I don't know that I'll get anything. I always have to say I'm not a medical intuitive, and I don't offer readings on that. I'll see if they want to say anything about process. When you understand that the body is form, and form is an expression of source, you move to source, and you move to source, realize or know the action of source. The action of source upon the form you've taken, upon the form you have taken, you can alter the physical realm, you can alter the physical realm, inclusive of illness. But how one does this is very particular, You have lessons to learn through what you create. You have lessons to learn through what you create. You don't get to bypass your lessons. You don't get to bypass your lessons. If you came to learn something, you will find a way to learn it. You will find a way to learn it. It's one way people learn. Illness is one way people learn. It's not always the highest. But it can be useful for some. When you have something you undergo. When you have something you undergo, a process of healing, you may engage with in many ways. You may engage with it in many ways. Energetic restructuring, we would have to say is always the base for healing, is always the basis for healing.
I love that. I thank you for that confirmation. I knew that. Beautiful. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. How do people hear about you or learn more about your work?
My website is my name. It's paulselig, Selig.com. And I do, live streams every week. And I do an online intensive every month. And I tour and do live events often.
Wonderful.
And the books are all available in bookstores. There's 12 come September. The 12th book comes out in September. And they're all the guide's teachings. And everything's on the website.
I love that. I want to pick up some books myself.
Terrific.
Thank you so much, Paul.
You're welcome.
That's this week's episode of The Higher Self. Man, I hope you go back and listen and rewatch and the whole thing. And really, please hear what I'm about to tell you. Those words, if you just take them, those messages, you receive them and allow yourself to embrace the full meaning and the energy of them and realize how simple and profound they were, they will have a massive impact on your life. We'll see you next week.